I'm Fonzo.
And I'm Eliza.
And we're the co-host of Grown, a podcast from the Moth that shows we're never fully grown.
Growing up feels like a phase that should end at some point, but does it ever really? Whether you're 16 or 26 or 86, you're gonna have to deal with family drama, your body, and the type of person you want to be. So why not put it all out in the open and go through it together?
Join us every other week to deal with cringe, culture, and the courageous efforts of people like you to get grown.
Start listening today. Follow Grown on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening right now.
One of the fun facts I loved throwing out as a kid was that my dad invented fake poop. Putting it that way is a little misleading, but mostly true. Technically, what he invented was a poop-shaped silicone device that you can insert under medical supervision to help practice engaging the muscles in your rectum. Its name, according to the patent, is fecum. My understanding of my dad's work was pretty limited to the fake poop punchline until the past decade or so, when conversations kept popping up about a new-to-me part of the body, the pelvic floor. Newly pregnant friends worried about it being suddenly in disrepair. Instagram influencers instructed me to download apps to track Kegel exercises. Turns out, my dad knows a thing or two about this complicated and often troublesome part of the body. And learning about it bears significance for my own health, now and far into the future. This is Embodied. I'm Anita Rao. We're going to get to my dad and poop talk in just a little bit, I promise. But first, an anatomy lesson.
The pelvic floor is a group of muscles that sits in the bottom part of our pelvis. So kind of think of it like a hammock, and it goes from the front of your pelvis, so like that pubic bone, up to your tailbone. It works on supporting your abdominal cavity. It works on the sphincters and control of your sphincters so that whether you urinate or defecate, and then it also works with sexual function.
Meet Ijoma Wampa. She's a certified specialist in pelvic health, a sexuality counselor, and the owner of the Center for Pelvic Excellence, Physical Therapy, and Wellness. To be sure you know exactly the region of the body she's talking about, she has a visualization exercise.
The easiest way I always tell people is like, imagine you're in an elevator and you have to pass gas, and then you kind of squeeze a bit to not let it go in the elevator. Those are those muscles that are working. A little bit of glute, but those are those muscles that are working that sphincter, your anal sphincter, to make sure nothing comes out. Or like when you have to run to the restroom, you squeeze a little bit. Those are those group of muscles as well.
This interconnected group of muscles that surround our bladder, bowels, and uterus are intertwined with nerves and tissue. And it can be connected to issues ranging from back pain and stool leakage to urinary incontinence and painful sex. The source of these issues can feel like a mystery, until it's not.
I was in high school and got my period for the first time and tried to put a tampon in, and it was just extremely painful.
That's Allison Byers, a writer and editor who specializes in health. The tampon experience was only the beginning for her. After pushing through pain for a while, she went to the doctor to get a pelvic floor exam and a pap smear.
I just screamed and cried so much. It was the worst pain I'd ever experienced. And she told me that, that we'll just try again in a few years. I just assumed everyone had this pain. And then, as friends started to have sex and talked about wearing tampons, I realized that not everyone experiences this type of pain I was feeling. And I thought maybe I'm just sensitive, or I just need to push through the pain. And I did for a lot of years, just trying different things. And I moved to Los Angeles and I found a gynecologist here. And I was told then that it was anxiety and that I just needed to relax. And she even told me that, before I engaged in penetrative sex, I should drink or take like a Xanax or something. And I felt very weird about that and felt like I, didn't want to have to drink or take something in order to, have sex and relax. but I took her advice and it went terribly. I still had that pain. And finally, it was like my talk therapist who suggested pelvic floor therapy, and kind of finally found that in my late 20s after just years of pain and just fear of, having sex or putting a tampon in.
Pelvic floor therapy. I've never been, but everyone I know who has wishes they'd known about it years earlier. In many European countries, it's standard protocol in the postpartum period. Here, most of my friends who've had babies had to figure it out on their own, like Erin.
This was never something that my doctors discussed with me beyond don't have sex for 6 weeks, and we'll talk about birth control after that 6 weeks comes and goes. And it's just like, okay, but what about these, like, when I bend down, there's like a gravitational pull that kind of hurts. Is that normal? How do you even Google gravitational pull on pelvic floor? Do I know my own anatomy well enough to Google what is hurting?
I most certainly have put similar medical quandaries into Google, hoping it would give me results. But the better thing to do when it comes to a part of your body whose function is so important, seek out professional help. Here's what it was like for Allison to go to pelvic floor therapy that very first time.
I was so nervous to go. I think I'd just been so traumatized by all the gynecologist appointments and doctors just doing a pap smear, doing a pelvic exam, and not listening to me and my pain. So I went in there very apprehensive, but my physical therapist was great. We actually spent the first half an hour of the appointment just talking about the pelvic floor. I had no idea of what it was or what it did. Then, she asked if it was okay if we, did a little tiny mini exam. She said, she was very upfront about, we can stop whenever. And if anything's uncomfortable, we can just sit and talk again. So I was ready to have that exam, but she just slowly, very gently, inserted her fingers very slowly. And she just talked with me and kept me distracted. And and at the end, she was able to tell me oh, your muscles are very tight. And it's not all in your head. And it's not just anxiety. You actually have something going on. And that was just it was so validating to hear that. And it just felt like finally somebody listened and could tell me that there was something actually wrong. And it wasn't just all in my head or made up. And so I just felt so comfortable and just so validated.
Pain doesn't have to be normal. And even if you've had a baby or two, you aren't destined to pee while laughing or coughing for the rest of your life. These symptoms can be warning signs that your pelvic floor is too tight or too weak.
Think of the bladder like a balloon with a hardcover balloon, right? And you have your abdominal cavity, which is more of your lungs, right? So think of if you're exerting yourself or you're holding your breath, you're putting pressure from your lungs or your abdominal cavity on the bladder. And then because you have weak sphincters, because the pelvic floor is weak, it's not able to hold the urine in at your urethra. So it just kind of squirts out a bit. And there could be degrees where it's full on wet your pants or little drops. But I always say as soon as you start noticing that, go see a pelvic therapist right away because it can get worse. And we also find in some places where it can be that your pelvic floor is too tight, which is essentially still a type of weakness that's not working to its full capacity and not able to sustain the closure of the sphincters at the urethra because it's so stressed out all day from being so tight.
So if all of this is making you think, well, damn, maybe I should go to pelvic floor therapy, Ijeoma says it's probably worth exploring. And if you have insurance, you may have a set of sessions that are covered as long as you get a referral. If you don't have insurance, there are also clinics like hers that take cash and some that have sliding fee scales. For some people, one session is enough to get a sense of the problem and steps you can take. For others, you may need to go regularly for a few months. Allison's process was longer.
So I was in PT actually for about 8 months. I got dilators the first session, and I met with her once a month. And then I did dilator work pretty much every other night. I tried to do like keep it on the schedule. So basically, it was a set of like 6 dilators, and the smallest one was smaller than the tampon. It was really tiny. I just kind of had to work on inserting those dilators and just kind of getting things loosened up a little bit and those muscles relaxed. So for me, it felt very much like just, persevering and dedication to this and making it a priority was really what helped my progress.
So, Allison, I mean, as we've been talking about, there's a lot of things that are hard to become aware of because things go undiagnosed for a really long time. People don't have a lot of sense of what might be normal and could be experiencing pain. And there's an emotional toll to that as well. You, for so long, were told, it's just anxiety or drink wine. How have you navigated the mental health toll and the emotional toll of kind of ignoring that pain for so long?
Yeah, I feel like now that I missed out a lot of years. I feel like in college when people were, going into relationships, or in high school entering into relationships, and in college, having sex. And I really missed out on all of that. And I feel now like I'm just getting a very delayed start. And I felt really lonely and depressed and isolated, and I couldn't participate in conversations. And I didn't hear anyone talking about the pain I was experiencing. And so it just felt very isolating, and that I just felt like, there was something wrong with me, or I was just too sensitive, or I didn't power through it enough. And so it felt really depressing. It felt very much like I'm never going to be able to be in a relationship or be able to move past a third date or whatever it may be and have physical intimacy. And actually, because of PT, a kind of an interesting thing happened. I think because I became more comfortable, I was able to actually explore my sexuality, and I came out as queer. And a lot of that is actually really because of PT and being able to just become more comfortable with that area down there. And, I just learned how to explore pleasure, even if it wasn't penetrative sex, and just realizing that there was just so much more there. And I lived in fear for so many years, and I lived in isolation for so many years, when I really was having something that was pretty common happening to me.
It is pretty common, and of course shows up for folks with penises too. If you're having pain during intercourse or pain shooting into your testicles, it could be related to your pelvic floor. Also, if you're big into strength training or weightlifting, you put stress on your pelvic floor pretty frequently. So we've talked about 2 of the 3 main functions of the pelvic floor: sex and urination. So it's time now to bring in the poop expert. I told you that my dad created a patent for fake poop, but he also coined a term that's become a pretty big deal in the pelvic floor world: dysynergic defecation. I can barely say it, but when he explains it, it makes much more sense.
In simple language, it means that the act of pooping has become incoordinated. It's no longer a coordinated process. And normally, most of us don't even think even a second about how we poop, because we get an urge, we go to the restroom, and usually we take care of the business in less than 5 minutes, and we're out. And this is a normal process for most of us. And we learn this almost serendipitously when we're young, and it essentially sticks with us for the rest of our life. But unfortunately, in about a third of adults, they have never learned this process properly during childhood. And in 2/3 of these adults with this problem with dysynergic defecation, they had a normal pooping behavior during childhood, but something changed in adult life, which then led to a new pooping behavior where, unbeknown to them, they have learned to obstruct themselves. And this obstructive process, or incoordinated process, is what we call as dysynergic defecation. And there are kind of 3, if you like, components to it. Some people have lost or are unable to generate a good pushing force. Others are paradoxically contracting the anal sphincter muscles that should normally be relaxing to allow poop to come out. And the third group they are unable to relax the pelvic floor sufficiently to evacuate stool. So one or more of these mechanics have gone wrong, which then leads to this dyssynergic defecation problem.
Okay, so we heard from someone who reached out to us who said that she had been struggling for a long time, actually multiple decades, could not figure out what was going wrong. She just kept being told over and over, you have constipation, you need to hydrate more, you need to really work on your digestive system. Found out eventually that she had been suffering from exactly what you just described. And here's a little clip from her. This is Annette.
I guess I had never really thought about the various muscles that are involved down there. I mean, a lot of us women are used to Kegel exercises and are familiar with that muscle. But the fact that there are, whole sets of muscles, some of which have to relax, some of which have to work to make all that. Because when we toilet train, we don't teach anyone how to do that stuff. It's all totally unconscious.
So there's Annette mentioning a lot of what you just said, this recognition that she had to relearn something that she maybe learned unconsciously at one point. So you work with folks doing biofeedback, really a mix of education and physical therapy so people can become more conscious of these muscles and how to coordinate them together. How does this process work?
So very good question. So first was really identifying the problem, as you nicely said, and as Annette really described it quite well. And having recognized this problem in the early 90s, we then set about really trying to correct this behavioral problem using standard physical therapy techniques where we use either visual feedback, auditory feedback, and verbal feedback. These are the three feedback techniques. Predominantly, we're using visual and verbal. Visual meaning we place a probe inside the rectum with pressure sensors. And when the person attempts to poop, there are pressure changes happening in the rectum muscle and in the anal sphincter muscle or the opening muscle. These pressure changes are then displayed on a monitor. And they can see in real time when they're attempting to poop what is happening to the rectal pressure and the anal pressure. And there's a normal pattern and there is an abnormal pattern. And we show them what those patterns are. And we try and educate them to convert their abnormal pattern to the normal pattern. And in the second part of this whole process is not only the visual display, but there are multiple components. We practice with them the right posture of sitting. We encourage them to use the squatty potty, which has become very popular, of course, that is elevating the feet. This elevation helps to both anchor the pelvic floor properly and prepares the pelvic floor to evacuate the process. Then we teach them diaphragmatic breathing techniques. And so the whole thing, we break down the whole act of pooping into 5 segments, and we work on each of those segments: posture, breathing, relaxation, and so on. And the finite thing is very critical because it is not like just strengthening the muscle or just relaxing the muscle. It is coordinating the muscle. In other words, upper half of the body is actually pushing and generating a push force. Simultaneously, the lower half of the body, which is the anal sphincter muscle and so on, has to relax. So it is a tricky movement, and for most of us it's intuitive, as I said at the beginning. But when things go wrong, it is very hard to break this down. And so these folks have learned a new behavior, and it is our job, using biofeedback techniques, to unlearn the new behavior, or if they've never learned it properly, to now learn a new normal coordinated process. So that's what biofeedback therapy entails.
So one of the things that I think about a lot when it comes to poop and the toilet is that, it's one of the few experiences that you really only ever have alone. So it's hard to know if something's going wrong, necessarily how you compare to other people, what the norm is, what the standard is. And I know from talking with you that can mean that diagnosis and seeking treatment can take a long time. People come in, describing diarrhea, but actually they're talking about stool leakage and they don't want to admit that, or they haven't really come to understand the distinctions of that. So someone who's working to think about the pelvic floor and how it relates to the bowel, but also how to get people to be able to start these conversations, I'm guessing you have to do some initial work to make people comfortable kind of acknowledging that it's okay. How do you make people comfortable talking about poop and their pooping habits when it's something that's super private?
Very good question, and it is both an art and a science of practicing medicine. I mean, we can read up a ton in the books and literature and through Dr. Google, but ultimately when you have to practice medicine, I think there is an art to the whole thing. So first and foremost, listen to the patient. Second is to try and figure out what are they trying to say, and many times they may not use the right words. And as I said, diarrhea is an often de facto word that is used by many people when they also have stool leakage. So very many times I use their terms. For example, I would ask them, is your diarrhea so urgent, sir, that you don't make it to the restroom? And when we use those kind of phrases and language, they say, yes, doctor, that is my problem. And this individual has already seen 5 doctors. Everybody has done a workup for diarrhea, but nobody has done a workup for stool leakage, and that is this gentleman's problem. And same with the pooping issues, people will use the word, oh, doctor, I'm constipated. And so, immediately everybody thinks of constipation. The equation in most physicians or health providers' mind is, oh, they have infrequent bowel movements. Now, studies after studies have now shown that infrequent bowel movement is also infrequent in constipated people. Majority of constipated patients, when they talk of constipation, it's one of 6 symptoms. But the other symptoms, which is straining to pass stool, using fingers to assist stooling, passing hard stools, a feeling of incomplete evacuation, are much, much more common and prevalent than infrequent bowel movements. But everybody thinks about constipation as infrequent bowel movements, and they're trying to speed up and give laxatives and so on, which is okay. But that is not addressing the root cause, which is dyssynergic defecation, that affects 40% of patients with chronic constipation. It is a huge number of people who have this problem. And just like Annette, I'm so happy that, she got the right care she deserves, and she got it. But it took a long while, and so are many, many people out there.
Drink your water, take your meds, and get yourself to the doctor if peeing, pooping, or having sex are not free of pain or discomfort. If you've listened this far and are sitting there thinking, well, I'm all good, great. But there's still stuff you can be doing now, preventatively, to set yourself up for future success. And as it happens, Kegels are not the answer. Here's Ijoma.
So there's things you can do preventatively. Number 1, stop holding your breath with everything. Don't hold your breath to poop. Don't hold your breath don't hold your breath with exercising, things like that. Because again, that adds extra pressure to pelvic floor, and you're just causing it to weaken right away or tighten up on you. Prevention could be just working out and working on your core naturally. So I definitely say teaming up with a personal trainer, someone that will work with you and watch your form just for a few sessions, or even just seeing a pelvic therapist. Hey, I just want to make sure I'm good and make sure I'm moving forward. Because I would say that's the best preventative thing, because seeing someone getting something individualized for you, because this is not one size fits all, because everybody's different. I don't push Kegels on people. Kegels are not for everyone. So we have to make sure you are a candidate for that. So I'm not that PT that does that with people go do Kegels, do 100 a day. No, because then you end up making things worse and it can be unnecessary. So holding your breath and core exercise.
Embodied is a production of North Carolina Public Radio, WUNC, a listener-supported station. If you want to lend your support to this podcast and WUNC's other shows on demand, consider a contribution at WUNC.org now. Incredible storytelling like you hear on Embodied is only possible because of listeners like you. This episode was produced by Kaya Finlay. Jenny Lawson is our sound engineer, and Quilla wrote our theme music. The show is supported by Weaver Street Market, a worker and consumer-owned cooperative selling organic and local food at 4 Triangle locations in North Carolina. Now featuring online shopping with next-day pickup. weaverstreetmarket.coop. And remember, if you enjoyed the show and want to support us, share about us on social media and tag us. It helps new folks find our show, and it means so much. Until next time, I'm Anita Rao, taking on the taboo with you.